Persia, known today as Iran, is a truly fascinating country. It has been a major power since long before the founding of Rome, stretching back to the very dawn of civilization. Even today, it continues to play a central role in the politics of the Middle East and Eurasia. Situated right between Europe and Asia, Persia has long served as a vital hub for trade, learning, and cultural exchange. What's even more remarkable is its enduring strength. Despite being invaded and conquered many times throughout history, it has always managed to rise again. This documentary explores the origins of Persia and reveals what made it so successful and unique among the world's great civilizations. The land we now call Iran, historical Persia, has been inhabited since prehistoric times. Some of the world's earliest agricultural communities appeared here as early as 7,200 BC. Notable sites like Choga Golan and Choga Bonat, located in the Zagros Mountains along Iran's western border, show that ancient peoples cultivated wild barley, lentils, and other legumes. Archaeologists have even discovered a 7,000-year-old jar of wine at one of these sites, now displayed at the University of Pennsylvania. Persia's culture has always been deeply connected with that of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. One of the first cities, the Sumerian city of Ur, is believed to have expanded eastward, founding the city of Susa as early as 4,395 BC. Susa would eventually become the capital of Elam, the first recorded nation in the region that would later become Persia. Susa remained a vital economic and trade center for over 5,500 years, until it was finally destroyed by the Mongols. Elam wasn't a centralized nation-state like we understand today. It was likely a loose confederation of various tribes and peoples living in the mountainous areas. The name Elam comes from Mesopotamian sources, but the people likely called themselves something like Halami, meaning those of the highlands. This mountain identity became a defining trait of Persian culture, setting it apart from the people of the plains in what is now Iraq. Throughout history, these two groups often clashed, sometimes conquering each other in turn. The rugged landscape of the mountains made large-scale irrigation farming difficult. Instead, the Elamites likely relied on semi-nomadic herding and small-scale agriculture in valley bottoms. This environment produced a tougher, hardier population compared to the more settled and agriculturally advanced people of the plains. In many ways, the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s was simply the latest chapter in a 6,000-year-old struggle between mountain and plain civilizations over regional dominance. Unfortunately, we still know very little about daily life in ancient Elam. Their writing system, developed around 3,200 BC, has not yet been fully deciphered. The Elamite language is unique and unrelated to other known languages of the region, making translation especially difficult. However, recent advances suggest we may soon unlock more of their secrets. One fascinating aspect of Elamite culture is its emphasis on animals in art, particularly dogs and bulls. This focus was quite different from the human and mythological themes favored by the Sumerians, Akkadians, or Egyptians. Their art also reflects a polytheistic religion centered around nature, with a strong reverence for a mother goddess. Rituals were often performed in sacred groves or mountain locations. Elamite religion was also notably tolerant, accepting the gods of neighboring cultures, a rare and progressive trait in the ancient world. Over time, the Elamites gradually incorporated the gods of neighboring peoples into their own pantheon. Some elements of Elamite religion even influenced later Persian belief systems, most notably Zoroastrianism. For example, the practice of worshipping on elevated places and the personification of natural forces as deities are ideas that carried forward. Another striking feature of Elamite culture was its respect for women. Women were portrayed as equals in their art, and queens were depicted alongside kings as their counterparts. This cultural trait persisted into later Persian societies, where women often held important roles and enjoyed more rights compared to other ancient civilizations. In its early history, Elam was often attacked by more powerful neighbors from the plains, regions that benefited from advanced irrigation systems and higher populations. In fact, Elam was the loser in what is considered the first recorded war in human history. The Sumerians invaded and looted Elam around 2700 BC. The city of Susa, Elam's capital, later came under Sumerian control during the reign of the legendary Sargon of Akkad. But power shifted over time. By 1100 BC, Elam had become a dominant force. King Shutruk Nakhunte led a series of conquests, capturing many cities around Babylon. However, internal struggles among his successors weakened the kingdom. In 1120 BC, Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar retaliated and conquered Elam, showing how difficult it was for any one power to maintain control in this volatile region. Despite these setbacks, Elam remained well connected with the broader world. Archaeological discoveries in Susa reveal trade items from the Indus Valley civilization in present-day Pakistan, as well as goods from eastern Iran and Afghanistan. This points to a far-reaching trade network operating both by land and sea. Afghanistan in particular was a major source of tin, an essential component for making bronze, the most advanced metal of the time. It's likely that Elam played a key role in redistributing this tin to Mesopotamia, and possibly even Egypt. They also traded stone, metal, and wood, materials that were scarce in the desert plains of Mesopotamia, crossed by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These early trade routes would only grow in importance and eventually evolve into the famed Silk Road, with Persia at its heart, acting as the bridge between East and West. Elam's power gradually faded with the arrival of Iranian, or Aryan, nomadic tribes who migrated into the region. These nomads came from the Eurasian steppes and lived in a way similar to early Slavs, Turks, and Mongols. Over time, the Elamites and Iranians began to mix, especially in southern Iran, in a gradual process that lasted over 1,000 years, beginning around 2000 BC. Even after the Iranian peoples became dominant, Elamite culture persisted. For instance, the Elamite language continued to be used as the main administrative language for a long time. This suggests that while Iranian groups may have ruled politically, much of the legal and bureaucratic structure was still operated by native Elamites. One of these Iranian groups, the Medes, began to unify the region under their leadership. Their first recognized leader, Darius, ruled between 727 and 675 BC, according to the ancient Greek historian Herodotus. It's worth noting that Herodotus is the same source who later exaggerated tales such as the 300 Spartans, so some of his accounts should be taken with caution. Nevertheless, the rise of the Medes is generally seen as a response to the harsh dominance of the Assyrian Empire. Darius' grandson, Cyrus, eventually allied with the Babylonians and helped bring down the Assyrian Empire by capturing its capital, Nineveh, in 612 BC. By the 7th century BC, most of the region was populated by Iranian peoples, Medes, Persians, and Parthians. Although the Medes were instrumental in toppling the Assyrians and laying the groundwork for the first Iranian Empire, it was the Persians who would ultimately take the lead. Under the leadership of Cyrus the Great, the Persian Empire, also known as the Achaemenid Empire, was born. Cyrus initially served as a vassal under the Medes, but eventually rebelled in 553 BC. His campaign of conquest quickly expanded. By 539 BC, he had captured Babylon, and by 533 BC, he had extended Persian control into parts of India. Surprisingly, little is known about Cyrus's early life before his dramatic rise to power. It appears that his rebellion may have succeeded because a Median general named Harpagus, originally sent to crush Cyrus, chose instead to join him. Why Harpagus betrayed the Medes and supported Cyrus remains a mystery. Ancient sources, including Herodotus, offer different versions, but the truth remains elusive. The ancient sources we have about Cyrus the Great are filled with mythology and embellishments, so they can't always be taken at face value. Still, we know that Harpagus, who was originally sent to defeat Cyrus, later became one of his most trusted generals. Perhaps Harpagus recognized early on the greatness that Cyrus would achieve. So, what exactly made Cyrus the Great? First, he united the various Iranian tribes into a stable and organized empire. He established a central administration and appointed provincial governors known as satraps. According to most historical accounts, these governors managed their regions efficiently and generally ruled in a way that benefited ordinary people. To keep them accountable, Cyrus created a system of royal inspectors known as the King's Eyes, a kind of ancient intelligence network that reported directly to him. The empire had 4 main capitals, each reflecting a high degree of regional autonomy. However, the true administrative heart remained in Susa, the former Elamite capital. Cyrus also developed an advanced postal system. Couriers traveling across the empire could always find fresh food, water, shelter, and horses at stations spaced no more than 2 days apart. Remarkably, this system was so effective that it remained mostly unchanged until the Muslim conquests over 1,000 years later. Cyrus's influence extended beyond politics and warfare. His ideas on governance and law echoed through history. For example, Thomas Jefferson was inspired by Cyropedia, a biography of Cyrus written by Xenophon when drafting the Declaration of Independence. Second, Cyrus famously conquered Babylon in 539 BC and freed the Israelites who had been exiled there. In the Hebrew Bible, this act is portrayed as a divine mission. Cyrus is described as a Messiah chosen by God. This made him the only non-Jewish figure in the Bible to receive such an honor. Third, Cyrus had a deep respect for the cultures and religions of the people he conquered. To the Persians, he is considered the father of the nation, while the Babylonians viewed him as a liberator. That says a lot about his leadership style, especially when compared to the oppressive Babylonian elite that came before him. Fourth, Cyrus founded the elite military unit known as the Immortals, a division of 10,000 soldiers who would remain the backbone of the Persian military for centuries. In short, as far as conquerors go, Cyrus stands out not just for the vast size of his empire, the largest the world had seen at the time, but also for how he built it. He achieved it with relatively limited bloodshed, often sparing civilian lives and religious sites. His legacy continued through his son, Cambyses II, who expanded the empire further. In 525 BC, Cambyses conquered Phoenicia, Cyprus, Egypt, Nubia, and parts of what is now Syria. To this day, the empire founded by Cyrus remains the largest of all the Iranian empires that followed. Cyrus's tomb still stands in modern-day Iran and is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. His capital city, Persepolis, is one of the most significant archaeological sites in the world. After Cambyses, Darius I took the throne. Under his rule, the Persian Empire reached its furthest extent, including an invasion of the Indus Valley in what is now Pakistan. However, Darius is perhaps most famous for launching the first Persian invasion of Greece in 492 BC. The campaign was plagued by bad luck. A key part of the fleet was destroyed by a storm, and the army was smaller than typical Persian standards. As a result, the invasion failed, ending in a defeat at the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC. Frustrated by the loss and determined to retaliate, Darius began planning a second invasion of Greece. But he died in 486 BC before he could carry it out, leaving the task to his son, Xerxes the Freed. Xerxes' management of the campaign was mediocre. By that point, repeated Persian invasions had forced the usually divided Greek city-states to unite. Still, Xerxes managed to burn the city of Athens in 480 BC, though its people had already evacuated. That same year, the Persians were decisively defeated at the naval battle of Salamis. Fearing being cut off in Europe, Xerxes retreated. At the same time, he had to put down a rebellion in Babylon. The remaining Persian forces in Greece were finally defeated at the Battle of Plataea. In 479 BC, Xerxes himself was later assassinated in 465 BC by the commander of his royal bodyguards. The Persian-Greek struggle for control over Anatolia and the Greek islands would continue for centuries, with neither side ever gaining full dominance. Despite these setbacks, Persia remained one of the most powerful empires in the world for a very long time. One of the empire's most impressive features was its effort to improve life in its often dry and semi-arid territories. Some areas received as little as 124 millimeters of rain per year. Under Darius the Great, the Persians developed the Shushtar hydraulic system, a network of canals that diverted river water to the city of Shushtar. It powered multiple mills and provided much-needed irrigation for agriculture. This project stands as one of the earliest large-scale water management systems in history. The Persians developed incredible systems of engineering and infrastructure, many of which supported their vast empire. One of these was a man-made waterfall and irrigation system that helped water nearly 100,000 acres of farmland and orchards. Another remarkable innovation, originally predating the Persian Empire, but significantly expanded under it, was the Qanat system. Qanats were underground canals designed to carry water from underground aquifers to fertile land. These tunnels were built below the surface to reduce evaporation, and because they tapped into groundwater, they provided a steady and reliable water supply, unaffected by rainfall. Their location underground also protected them from flood damage and the destruction of war, making them an extremely durable form of infrastructure for Persian society. Building a qanat required advanced engineering skills. The canal had to have a very precise slope, gentle enough to avoid erosion, but steep enough to allow the water to flow. Workers dug vertical shafts at regular intervals to access the tunnels during construction and for ongoing maintenance. These vertical shafts left a distinctive pattern on the landscape that can still be seen today. Another unique Persian innovation was the yakhchal, a large domed clay structure used to store ice. During the winter, ice was collected and stored inside these structures, keeping food cool throughout the rest of the year, an ancient form of refrigeration. Persians are also credited with early contributions to arts and entertainment. Some historians suggest they invented the kitara, an early ancestor of the modern guitar. They also helped popularize backgammon, one of the oldest known board games still played today. Chess is sometimes claimed to be a Persian invention as well, though that is debated, with many pointing to Indian origins. Persian society was a rich cultural mosaic, drawing from many regions across their vast empire. While slavery did exist in areas like Babylon and Egypt, regions with long histories of slavery, within the Persian Empire, slavery was not central to the economy. It existed, but on a relatively small scale, certainly less than in ancient Greece or Rome. Women in Persian society enjoyed an unusual degree of freedom for the ancient world. They could own property, run businesses, manage money, and travel freely. Noble women were even known to ride horses and practice archery, privileges typically reserved for men in other cultures, such as the Greeks. The main area where women were excluded was in holding political office or ruling the empire. Another major contribution from ancient Persia was the foundation of one of the first monotheistic religions, Zoroastrianism. Founded by the prophet Zoroaster, also known as Zarathustra, the exact historical timeline of his life is unclear. While religious tradition places him in the 6th century BC, some historians believe he may have lived as early as the 10th century BC and later became a semi-mythical figure. Zoroastrianism presents a worldview centered around the eternal struggle between a supreme god of good, Ahura Mazda, and an opposing force of evil. The religion includes concepts like free will, life after death, angels and demons, heaven and hell. It's considered to have had a profound influence on later Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, as well as on Buddhism and even Greek philosophy. One well-known example of Zoroastrian influence is the story of the 3 wise men, or Magi, who visited the infant Jesus in the Christian Bible. The word Magi refers to Zoroastrian priests. In Zoroastrian theology, Ahura Mazda is all-knowing, but not all-powerful. The religion also emphasizes the protection and reverence of nature, likely influenced by older animist and polytheist traditions from both Iranian tribes and the Elamites. Fire played a central role in their rituals, often used during prayers along with flowing water. The Zoroastrian concept of Asha, meaning truth, order, and righteousness, was said to inspire the rule and legal philosophy of Cyrus the Great, even though he never imposed Zoroastrianism on the people he conquered. Remarkably, Zoroastrianism is still practiced today as a minority religion in parts of Iran and India. Overall, the Persian Empire was, by ancient standards, relatively tolerant and well-governed. While rebellions were dealt with harshly, the empire generally respected local traditions, cultures, and religions. It was an autocracy, but one with a vision: to improve the lives of ordinary people and to create a fair, efficient administrative system that worked to limit corruption and abuse of power. Persia truly was a brilliant civilization. Its contributions, whether in legal systems, women's rights, agriculture, engineering, or religion, left a lasting mark on human history. The foundations laid by Cyrus the Great and Darius the Great would eventually fall to another giant of history, Alexander the Great. Alexander, in fact, deeply admired Cyrus. He read Cyropedia, the biography written by Xenophon, from a young age and drew inspiration from Cyrus's courage and leadership. Alexander was the king of Macedonia, a kingdom on the northern edge of the Greek world. Born in 356 BC, he was tutored by none other than Aristotle, the famed philosopher and scientist. By the age of 16, Alexander was already leading troops and governing in his father's absence. At 20, he became king. His father, Philip of Macedon, had unified the Greek city-states and extended his rule over parts of the modern-day Balkans, Bulgaria, and beyond. Philip of Macedon was assassinated in 336 BC by the captain of his own bodyguard, a fate similar to that of Xerxes more than a century earlier. The early days of Alexander's rule revealed just how ruthless he could be. He ordered the execution of one of his cousins and 2 Macedonian princes. Whether they were involved in his father's murder remains uncertain, but what is clear is that their deaths solidified Alexander's grip on the throne. Alexander wasted no time in quelling any opposition that followed Philip's death. One of the most striking examples was the destruction of the ancient city of Thebes in 335 BC. In response to their rebellion, Alexander leveled the 1,000-year-old city and sold its population into slavery, sparing only priests and those loyal to Macedonia. Whether out of guilt or as a way to silence criticism, Alexander would later show generosity toward any Theban survivors he encountered. Regardless of the motive, his actions served as a stark warning to other Greek cities, including Athens, effectively crushing any thoughts of rebellion. Following in Philip's footsteps, Alexander took the title of hegemon, or supreme commander. Early in his reign, he demonstrated remarkable military skill and remained undefeated throughout his life, earning a place in history as one of the greatest generals of all time. In 334 BC, Alexander launched his campaign against the Persian Empire with an army of about 50,000 men, including 6,000 cavalry and a naval force of 38,000. He quickly conquered the western regions of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, which were inhabited by Greeks living under Persian control. He then moved south through Syria and the Levant. At the Battle of Issus in 333 BC, the Greek Macedonian forces encountered a Persian army at least twice their size, led by King Darius III. The battle took place in a narrow strip between the sea and the mountains, limiting the Persians' ability to use their superior numbers. When Alexander's forces broke through the Persian lines, Darius panicked and fled, an act that caused his entire army to collapse. It was the first time a Persian army, led by a Persian emperor, had been defeated in battle. The shock was likely felt by both sides, including Alexander himself. In his hasty retreat, Darius abandoned not only his royal regalia, his bow, chariot, and mantle, but also his wife, 2 daughters, and even his own mother. Though Alexander treated these royal women with respect, he refused to release them unless Darius acknowledged him as the rightful emperor of Persia. Eventually, Alexander married one of Darius's daughters to strengthen his claim to the Persian throne. Next, Alexander turned his attention to Tyre, present-day Lebanon. The city resisted, so in 332 BC, he laid siege to it, eventually destroying it. The men were killed, and the women and children were sold into slavery. Gaza followed suit, resisting fiercely and even wounding Alexander in the shoulder. The city suffered the same brutal fate. After these victories, the rest of Egypt surrendered without resistance. Alexander founded several cities named after himself, but it was Alexandria in Egypt, established in 331 BC, that became a major hub of trade and learning. It would later house the famed Lighthouse of Alexandria and the Great Library. 2 years after Issus, Darius again faced Alexander at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC. Despite commanding a larger, better positioned force with experienced commanders, Darius once more fled the battlefield, this time before the battle was even decided. His premature retreat demoralized his troops and marked the beginning of the end for the Persian Empire. From that point on, Persia crumbled. Darius was never able to assemble a third army, likely due to the disastrous fate of his previous ones. Alexander's contrasting approach, rewarding those who surrendered and brutally punishing those who resisted, proved highly effective. Cities were more inclined to submit than risk destruction. Alexander's brilliance wasn't just in battlefield tactics. Since the age of 16, he had skillfully combined diplomacy with calculated brutality to hold his empire together. His rapid conquest of the largest empire in the world was also helped by Darius's repeated failures. Twice, Darius's cowardly retreats led directly to the collapse of armies twice the size of Alexander's. In stark contrast, Alexander consistently ignored his general's advice and led from the front, often risking his own life. This boldness inspired fierce loyalty among his men, many of whom were from regions that didn't particularly love Macedon. They fought not for a state, but for Alexander himself, whose personal courage earned their admiration. On the other side, Persian troops, drawn from far-flung and culturally diverse regions like Egypt and Babylon, had little motivation to risk their lives for a leader who abandoned them. Watching their emperor flee twice sapped any will to fight. Many historians have argued that Persia was already doomed, tired, fragmented, and in decline. But this narrative can be questioned. After all, the Persian Empire was still able to gather massive armies, twice. The truth likely lies in a combination of Alexander's extraordinary leadership and Darius's catastrophic failures. Despite facing a smaller Greek army, the Persian Empire wasn't weakened by previous rebellions or civil wars. There were few defections among local rulers to Alexander's side, and overall, the Persian Empire remained a well-run, efficiently administered state. Its fall may have come down to a remarkable twist of fate, a clash between two completely opposite figures. Darius III, widely regarded as a weak ruler, and Alexander the Great, a once-in-a-millennium military genius. By conquering Persia and uniting it with Greece and Macedon, Alexander had built the largest empire the world had ever seen. The campaign ended in 330 BC with the Greek sack of Persepolis, which was looted for several days. A fire, whether accidental or intentional, broke out in the palace and consumed most of the city. Some believed it was revenge for the burning of the Acropolis by Xerxes generations earlier. Others thought it was simply a tragic accident. Alexander reportedly regretted the blaze, but by then it was too late to stop it. The relationship between the Greeks and Persians was complex, marked by centuries of war, yet tinged with mutual respect. Unlike many other peoples the Greeks encountered, they recognized the Persians as fellow civilized rivals. According to Plutarch, Alexander once paused before a statue of Xerxes and asked aloud whether he should leave it fallen as punishment for Xerxes' invasions of Greece, or restore it in honor of his other noble qualities. After defeating Darius, Alexander spent the following years chasing down rival claimants to the Persian throne across Central Asia, territories that today include Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan. Always restless, he eventually set his sights on India. In 326 BC, his initial victories there were impressive, but the campaign proved to be a step too far. His soldiers, exhausted after years of constant warfare, wanted to return home and enjoy the spoils of their victories. Though they remained loyal to Alexander personally, they refused to continue conquering. By 324 BC, Alexander had returned to the ancient city of Susa. There, he began working to legitimize himself as a Persian emperor in the eyes of his new subjects. This effort sparked growing tension with his Greek troops. One particularly tragic incident occurred during a drunken argument when Alexander killed a close friend who had once saved his life. The fight stemmed from accusations that Alexander had adopted what his men saw as decadent Eastern ways. Another major challenge was integrating Greek and Macedonian veterans with Persian officers. Alexander attempted to mix command structures, assigning Persian troops to Greek officers and vice versa. He also orchestrated mass marriages between his officers and noble Persian women in Susa, an effort to merge the two cultures. However, these measures had limited lasting impact. As he began organizing the administration of his vast empire, Alexander took a firm hand, executing several satraps who had proven corrupt or disloyal. But not long after returning to Persia, he suddenly died in 323 BC. The most likely cause was a fever contracted in nearby swampland, although rumors of poisoning circulated, fueled by his powerful enemies and the suddenness of his death. While dozens of theories exist, none have been definitively proven. Ironically, for a man who conquered the world and survived countless battles, Alexander's death came not through political intrigue or warfare, but through something as ordinary and unglamorous as illness. He was buried in Alexandria, though the fate of his remains after the 2nd century AD remains a mystery. Alexander's death left a power vacuum. On his deathbed, when asked to name a successor, he reportedly replied, "To the strongest." This set off a struggle among his generals, leading to the division of the empire into 4 parts: Macedon and Greece, Thrace and Western Anatolia, the Persian heartland with Central Asia, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, and Egypt, which also controlled parts of the Levant, Cyprus, and southern Anatolia. These regions remained under Greek control or influence for nearly 3 centuries, marking the start of the Hellenistic period. For ordinary people, life didn't change much. Most of the changes affected the ruling classes, who began to adopt Greek customs, or mix them with local traditions. A good example is the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, started by Alexander's general Ptolemy. They ruled until the Roman era, balancing Greek military power with local traditions. The last ruler of this dynasty was Cleopatra, famous for her liaisons with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Her death in 30 BC marked the end of Ptolemaic rule. The Hellenistic influence even spread to Central Asia, where a Greek-influenced kingdom called the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom arose, one of the last remnants of Alexander's empire. Ironically, it was far from Greece. The eastern portion of the former Persian Empire became the Seleucid Empire, named after General Seleucus. This empire was in constant rivalry with Ptolemaic Egypt. Though powerful at first, it failed to maintain control of territories beyond the Indus River, eventually accepting that boundary as its eastern limit. The Seleucids tried to push westward into Greece, but were defeated by a coalition of Greek states and their new Roman allies. This defeat weakened the empire and paved the way for conquest by the Parthians. The Seleucid administration couldn't maintain control, though their most lasting legacy was the spread of Hellenistic culture throughout the region. Greek language, education, and trade became dominant, and the first translations of the Bible, the Septuagint, were written in Greek. Over time, Greek influence waned in Iran and the Near East, with native Persian and Zoroastrian traditions gradually reasserting themselves. Yet in Central Asia, a unique blend of Greek and Buddhist culture took hold, known as Greco-Buddhism. This cultural fusion eventually spread Buddhism into China. The Parthians, a nomadic people from what is now Turkmenistan, were initially ruled by Greek satraps under the Seleucids. However, they eventually rose up and overthrew their Greek overlords, establishing their own powerful empire. The Parthian Empire reached a major turning point under Mithridates IV, known as Mithridates the Great. Around 155 BC, he launched military campaigns in the east to bring the Greco-Bactrian kingdoms under control and pushed further into the Indus Valley. At the same time, he began wars in the west to expand into Greco-Roman territories. This followed a recurring theme in Persian history: a centralized empire based in what is now modern-day Iran, striving to expand both eastward into Central Asia and India, and westward into the Levant and Anatolia. Capable rulers managed to extend the empire, while weak leadership caused it to contract. When a dynasty weakened too much, it was often replaced by nomadic invaders, first the Medes, then the Persians, and later the Parthians. Despite these invasions, the underlying bureaucratic structure and daily life of the common people remained mostly unchanged, except among the elites. The Parthian Empire was no different. During this time, a rich blend of Greek and Iranian culture began to emerge. One striking example of this cultural fusion was the worship of Mithra, a deity who would later inspire the Roman mystery religion known as Mithraism. This cult became popular among Roman soldiers and competed with early Christianity. It included astrological beliefs, secret rituals, multiple initiation levels, and functioned almost like a military-based secret society, something akin to a martial Freemasonry. One unique aspect of the Parthian political system was its aristocratic nature. While it wasn't democratic, the nobility had a say in governance. They could vote to depose an incompetent king without plunging the empire into civil war. Similarly, powerful nobles could be removed or punished by the king, as long as the decision was considered just. This system provided a degree of political stability that contrasted sharply with the frequent civil wars that plagued both the Greek city-states and the Roman Republic. Parthia became a formidable opponent to Rome, repeatedly thwarting Roman efforts to expand eastward. The Parthian military leaned heavily on mounted archers, preserving the nomadic steppe warfare traditions more faithfully than their predecessors. Their most famous battlefield tactic was the Parthian shot, a retreating archer firing backward while fleeing, often catching pursuing enemies off guard. One of the most dramatic moments in Roman-Parthian conflict occurred in 53 BC, when the Parthians defeated and killed Crassus, a member of the Roman triumvirate, alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey. Legend says they forced him to swallow molten gold as punishment for his greed. The next major phase in Persian history came with the rise of the Sasanian Empire, the last pre-Islamic Persian dynasty. The Sasanians came from an old Persian noble family in the same region that had produced Cyrus the Great. In 224 AD, they overthrew the Parthians and recentered Persian identity around traditional Iranian culture. Zoroastrianism was re-established as the state religion. While Hellenistic influences remained in peripheral regions like the Levant, they were much less significant in Iran itself. Religious tolerance persisted under the Sasanians, but a key distinction between this new Persian empire and its Roman counterpart, now turning Christian, was the deliberate revival of native Iranian traditions. The Sasanian Empire emerged as the primary rival of the Eastern Roman, or Byzantine Empire. During their rule, the Babylonian Talmud was compiled, and Jewish scholarly life thrived in several Sasanian cities. This period also saw the rise of Manichaeism, a new religion founded by the prophet Mani, which claimed to be the ultimate synthesis of Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Buddhism. Though it spread quickly, Manichaeism angered the religious authorities of all the major faiths and was eventually persecuted by the Sasanians, as well as later rulers in the West, China, and the Islamic world. The religion disappeared by the 14th century, though it had a lasting influence on early Gnostic Christian sects like the Cathars. Compared to the Parthians, the Sasanian Empire was far more centralized and urbanized. It built stronger ties with the East, reviving and expanding long-standing trade networks with India and China, most notably the Silk Road. This ancient trade route, named after the Chinese invention of silk, had existed since the Bronze Age. Under the Sasanians, cultural exchange with China flourished. Musicians, dancers, and artisans traveled between the two empires, and they cooperated to protect the trade route from nomadic raiders. Sasanian control even extended into the Indian Ocean, where they displaced Roman influence and dominated sea trade. This era is often described as the pinnacle of classical Persian culture. Much of their philosophy, architecture, literature, and engineering later became integrated into the Islamic world. In fact, many of their innovations were mistakenly attributed to Islam by later historians. Among these might be the so-called Baghdad battery, a ceramic jar containing a metal cylinder that could produce a weak electric charge, possibly the earliest known battery, although its purpose remains unclear. Just as Islam was beginning to take shape under the Prophet Muhammad, both the Sasanian and Byzantine empires were exhausted from a prolonged and destructive series of wars. A devastating plague known as the Plague of Shiro further weakened the region around 627 AD. Simultaneously, invasions by Turkish tribes reduced the military strength of the Sasanians. After the Sasanian king Khosrow II was killed by a rival, a chaotic civil war broke out. Between 628 and 632 AD, up to 10 different claimants fought for control. By the time this turmoil ended, the Arab Muslim forces launched an invasion of Mesopotamia. The first attack was repelled, but a second assault in 636 AD resulted in the loss of all territory west of modern-day Iran. In 642 AD, another attack followed, and the Sasanian Empire collapsed within a decade. Persian resistance did not end immediately. Local uprisings tried to oust Arab governors and soldiers, but these were crushed with reinforcements from the Arabian Peninsula. Zoroastrian religious texts were burned, and forced conversions followed. Many Zoroastrians fled the region and became the ancestors of the modern-day Zoroastrian communities, especially those in India. In India and other parts of Asia, non-Muslims were historically subjected to a heavy tax known as the jizya, and could be enslaved despite their status. However, it wasn't until the later Middle Ages that Islam became the dominant religion in Iran. The Arab-Muslim conquest of Persia was nearly mirrored by their efforts against the Byzantine Empire around the same time. This led to the formation of the Rashidun Caliphate, which went on to control vast regions, including the entire Middle East, comprising Iran, Egypt, Libya, Syria, and Mesopotamia, as well as parts of Central Asia. The relationship between Persia and Islam is a complex one. On one hand, Islam was imposed upon the Persians, who resisted widespread conversion for centuries. On the other hand, Persian culture significantly influenced the development of Islam, particularly the branches that spread across Asia and among the Turks, who would later establish the powerful Ottoman Empire. While Islam did transform Persia, it didn't erase Persian civilization any more than previous invasions by Iranians, Greeks, or Parthians had. Persian culture remained resilient and continued to shape the region's identity. After the Rashidun Caliphate, the Umayyad Caliphate took power. Though it was originally an Arab empire, it absorbed many aspects of Persian culture and drew heavily from Persian and Mesopotamian resources in terms of wealth and manpower. The Umayyads also adopted Persian administrative systems and court customs. At its peak in 750 AD, the Umayyad Caliphate stretched from Central Asia all the way to the Pyrenees Mountains, in what is now northern Spain. However, the empire soon became overextended and began to fragment into smaller, more manageable states. Part of this fragmentation was due to a dispute over who should succeed the Prophet Muhammad. Since Muhammad's empire had a religious foundation, this political disagreement developed into a deep religious divide. Shia Muslims believe that Muhammad appointed his cousin, Ali, as his rightful successor. Sunni Muslims, however, argue that leadership was correctly given to Abu Bakr, chosen by a council of senior companions. This rift has continued to influence the Muslim world up to the present day. Over time, what began as a dispute over leadership evolved into theological and cultural differences. Initially, Shia Islam was more prevalent in Egypt and North Africa, but today, Iran is seen as the heart of Shia Islam, often in opposition to the predominantly Sunni rest of the Muslim world. The Umayyad Caliphate was eventually replaced by the Abbasid Caliphate, which came to power with the help of an Iranian general. The Abbasids more thoroughly integrated Persian culture and administrative traditions into Arab rule and Islamic governance. They founded the city of Baghdad in 762 AD, near the ancient site of Babylon. Baghdad soon became a major center of learning and innovation for the Muslim world, home to the world's first paper mill, using technology inspired by the Chinese. The Abbasids preserved and studied knowledge from Persian, Roman, and Greek civilizations, and traded widely across the known world. Through their efforts, Asian innovations such as the concept of zero and early gunpowder reached the West. The Abbasid Empire also faced difficulties in maintaining control over its vast territories, gradually losing distant regions like Morocco in the 830s, Egypt in the 870s, and North Africa in the 920s. From 945 AD until the 13th century, the Seljuk Turks, who originated from the Eurasian steppes, took control over much of the region. Like previous waves of nomadic invaders, the Seljuks replaced a declining dynasty. Even though they held practical control over the state and military, the Abbasids remained nominally in power, while Iranian officials managed the empire's administration. The Abbasid period is often considered the engine behind the Islamic Golden Age. This era saw a flowering of scientific knowledge, drawing from Egyptian, Persian, Greek, and Roman legacies, and enriched by cultural exchanges from across Eurasia, from Western Europe to India and China. Major advances occurred in medicine, philosophy, astronomy, chemistry, geometry, physics, especially optics, and mathematics, including the invention of algebra. Notably, many of these achievements came from religious minorities such as Zoroastrians, Christians, and Jews, who, while excluded from political leadership, contributed as doctors, scientists, and engineers. The Abbasids also produced some of the most famous works of Islamic literature, such as the 1001 Nights, which likely began as an Arabic translation of older Persian and Indian tales. Over time, these stories were enriched with folklore from Arabic, Persian, Mesopotamian, and Egyptian sources, giving rise to legendary figures like Aladdin, Sinbad, and Ali Baba. While the Seljuk rule did not significantly disrupt daily life under the Abbasids, this continuity was shattered by the Mongol invasions. Unlike previous nomadic incursions, the Mongols brought unprecedented scale and brutality. They devastated much of the Islamic world, culminating in the sack of Baghdad in 1258. Many cities were destroyed, and their populations massacred. The destruction of Baghdad, a key intellectual hub, marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age. Countless libraries, mosques, and other cultural institutions were burned, erasing generations of scholarship and spiritual life. The Mongol invasions also differed from earlier ones by their widespread destruction of institutions and scholarly centers, leaving long-lasting scars on the Muslim world. Without these complex irrigation systems, many urban centers and farmlands in Persia would have become uninhabitable. Persia experienced some recovery under the Mongol Ilkhanate, which restored trade routes and repaired parts of the irrigation infrastructure. During the Mongol occupation, most Mongols converted to Islam, often embracing Sufism, a mystical and esoteric branch of Islam that blended well with the Mongols' earlier animist and Buddhist beliefs. Just as Persia was beginning to bounce back, two catastrophic events struck the region. The first was the arrival of the Black Death in 1349, which ultimately killed about 30% of the population. The second was the invasion of Timur the Lame, also known as Tamerlane, in 1381. Timur was the last great nomadic conqueror and one of the most ruthless leaders in history. He earned his nickname due to injuries sustained to his leg and 2 fingers from arrows during his youth. His strategy was brutally straightforward. He demanded unconditional surrender, and if refused, he would slaughter or enslave everyone in his path, including the elderly, women, and children. His campaigns may have caused the deaths of as many as 17 million people, roughly 5% of the world's population at the time. Many viewed him as an apocalyptic figure, perhaps even the harbinger of war. Paradoxically, despite his violent legacy, Timur was also a great patron of the arts, especially architecture and poetry. However, his empire, founded on bloodshed and terror, collapsed less than a century after his conquests. Persia would continue to be ruled in part by other nomadic tribes. From 1452 onward, the Black Sheep Turkmen, Kara Koyunlu, were succeeded by the White Sheep Turkmen, Ak Koyunlu, in 1467. The devastation and chaos wrought by the Mongol invasions had perhaps for the first time in millennia permanently shattered Persia's unity, including its Iranian heartland. This political disorder created space for religious movements to grow in influence and help restore order. The most significant of these movements was inspired by Shia Islam, marking the beginning of Shia dominance in Iran. Shah Ismail, a religious leader and noble of mixed Turkoman, Kurdish, Greek, and Georgian ancestry, became a perfect ruler for a land that had absorbed so many diverse cultures into its unique identity. Similarly, the new Iranian style of Shia Islam quickly incorporated many Sufi orders, deepening the theological divide between Iranian Shia Islam and Arabic Sunni Islam. Between 1501 and 1511, Shah Ismail rebuilt a Persian empire with borders familiar to the region, encompassing Iran, the Caucasus, Turkmenistan, parts of Afghanistan, and some control over Mesopotamia. The Safavid Empire's main rival was its powerful western neighbor, the Ottoman Empire. While Iran had been ravaged by Timur and other nomadic tribes, the Turks had established a formidable empire in Anatolia. The Ottomans achieved a centuries-old Muslim dream by conquering Constantinople and controlled the Balkans, Greece, Palestine, and Egypt. At its height, their empire extended into North Africa and Ukraine, and even laid siege to Vienna twice. Together, the Ottomans, Safavids, and Mughals formed what historians call the Islamic Gunpowder Empires. Their armies and expansion heavily relied on early mastery of gunpowder weaponry. These empires were stable, wealthy, innovative, and expansionist. The Safavid Empire was meritocratic. Positions could be inherited, but only if the heir proved capable. The Safavids maintained relatively friendly relations with the Mughals, thanks to the natural barrier of the harsh mountains between them in Afghanistan and Pakistan. In contrast, the Safavids and Ottomans frequently clashed over control of Mesopotamia, the Caucasus, and eastern Anatolia. This rivalry with the Ottomans encouraged the Safavids to forge friendly ties with European powers. Under Shah Abbas I, known as the Great, the Safavid Empire traded with the Dutch East India Company and even established an alliance with the Austrian Habsburgs. By 1618, Shah Abbas had reclaimed Baghdad, eastern Anatolia, and Georgia from the Ottomans. These military successes were made possible by modernizing the Safavid army, inspired by the British model and guided by Sir Robert Shirley. The relationship with England was well established, and with assistance from the British Royal Navy, Shah Abbas was able to strengthen his empire significantly. Persia's ports, including Bahrain and Hormuz, were important hubs for Portuguese trade. Europe imported famous Persian goods such as carpets, silk, and other textiles. For the common people, living standards in Persia were roughly on par with those in Europe. However, Western visitors often noted that fertile lands were left uncultivated, attributing this to poor governance and a lack of interest in agriculture by the ruling elite. Many monuments from the Safavid period still stand today, including several grand and richly decorated mosques in Isfahan, which was also a center of learning. However, by the mid-17th century, Islamic culture in Persia had begun to stagnate. The strong respect for traditional knowledge turned into a resistance to innovation or questioning established ideas. This reluctance put Persia at a disadvantage compared to Europe, which was embracing the scientific method. The successors of Shah Abbas I were much less capable rulers and are often remembered as being more interested in wine and women than in governing. This weakness emboldened neighboring powers, especially Russia, which had been growing in strength and expanding southward and eastward for 2 centuries. Under Peter the Great, Russia conquered Persia's territories in the Caucasus in 1723. Meanwhile, regions like Afghanistan and Pakistan rebelled against Persian rule, and the Ottoman Empire also seized parts of Iranian territory. The Treaty of Constantinople in 1724 temporarily divided Iranian lands between Russia and the Ottomans. By 1735, most of these lands were reclaimed by Persia, following a rebellion and the rise of Nader Shah. Nader Shah was the leader behind restoring Iran's independence in 1735. He then invaded India, sacking Delhi and using the wealth he seized to finance the reconquest of lands lost to the Ottomans. Over time, however, Nader Shah became paranoid and cruel, and after his assassination in 1747, Persia controlled the Caucasus, Mesopotamia, and parts of Anatolia. What followed was a long period of civil war and chaos. The winner of this conflict, Aga Muhammad Khan, founded the Qajar dynasty in 1796. His reign was focused on re-establishing Iranian control over the Caucasus. Like many countries at the time, Iran struggled to maintain independence against increasingly powerful and industrialized European colonial empires. Following Aga Muhammad Khan's rule, Iran permanently lost much of the Caucasus region to Russia during 2 Russo-Persian wars, 1804 to 1813 and 1826 to 1828. This happened despite Russia fighting a devastating war against Napoleon simultaneously. Many Muslims from the Caucasus refused to live under Orthodox Russian rule and migrated to Iran. Later, the ruling elite of Iran increasingly allowed foreign powers to influence the country, playing Russia and England against each other. England, the colonial ruler of India, was on a collision course with Russia over control of Central Asia and Persia. Between 1905 and 1911, several revolutions weakened the Shah's rule and increased demands for democratization. These events transformed aristocratic Persia into the modern Iranian state, but also left the country vulnerable to foreign domination. In 1907, the Anglo-Russian Convention divided Iran into two zones of influence without consulting its people, highlighting Persia's loss of autonomy. Foreign powers controlled the competing factions vying for power within the country. The discovery of oil in 1908 worsened corruption and did little to modernize or develop Iran. In 1921, as Britain and the Soviet Union struggled for control over Iran's strategically important oil reserves, both nations saw Iran as vital. The Soviets wanted access to the Indian Ocean and to threaten British colonies in the Middle East and India. With British support, Reza Khan took power and founded the Pahlavi dynasty, which ruled until the 1979 revolution. Reza Khan established an authoritarian, nationalist, and militaristic government, emphasizing secularism and anti-communism. While the country modernized rapidly under his rule, the regime was also marked by corruption and oppression. The secular policies of the Shah were resented by a predominantly Muslim and devout population. Efforts to westernize, including changes in dress, women's liberation, and various socio-economic reforms, met with resistance. During World War II, the Iranian government initially leaned towards siding with Germany. In response, British and Soviet forces invaded Iran. The country then became a critical supply route for sending American-made military equipment to the Soviet Union under the Lend-Lease Agreement. The post-war period was marked by political instability and unresolved tensions over Iran's relationship with Western powers. The new Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, initially ruled in a manner that suggested Iran might evolve into a constitutional monarchy, similar to that of the UK or other modern states. The relationship between the Shah and the democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh deteriorated when Mossadegh nationalized the British-controlled oil industry. Mossadegh was removed from power in 1952, but was briefly reinstated due to popular pressure. However, in 1953, he was permanently ousted in a coup backed by the United States and the United Kingdom. From 1953 to 1973, Western companies managed Iran's oil resources. In 1973, amid the oil crisis of the 1970s, the Shah reclaimed control over Iranian oil and used the revenue to modernize the country and build a stronger military. In 1979, the Islamic Revolution dramatically transformed Iran, establishing the Islamic Republic that exists today. Although communist activists helped bring about the revolution, they were soon purged, which led to strained relations between Islamic Iran and the atheist communist Soviet Union. Following the revolution, Iran severed all ties with the West, highlighted by the Iran hostage crisis. Around the same time, Saddam Hussein sought to exploit the chaos in Iran to expand Iraq's territory, particularly in oil-rich regions. Iraq received support from the US, USSR, France, the UK, Egypt, and other Arab countries. Today, Iran faces Western sanctions due to its nuclear program. Regionally, it exerts influence over traditional Persian territories such as Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. At the same time, Iran is strengthening its ties with China and Russia and joining international groups like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Throughout history, the Persian Empire has been one of the most powerful and influential empires, making significant contributions to the world across industry, culture, and beyond.